From the moment he walked away from the presidency, Richard Nixon began one last campaign, a battle for his place in history.
People didn't think it was enough to admit mistakes, fine. If they want me to get down and grovel on the floor, no, never.
History has noted the many achievements of Richard Nixon, but his legacy will always be overshadowed by one word: Watergate.
He leaves the White House the last time as President of the United States.
That a man like this could become president of the greatest democracy in the world is one of the great triumphs of will and intelligence. And then when he got there, would set about destroying himself. It's an extraordinary story, and Shakespeare isn't around to write it, so people like me try.
Richard Nixon was a leader whose potential for greatness was tragically betrayed by his own behavior.
I brought myself down. I gave them a sword, and they stuck it in, and they twisted it with relish. And I guess if I had been in their position, I'd have done the same thing.
Watergate grew out of a willingness to use the machinery of the federal government to, as one White House memo said, screw our political enemies. And the president kept a long list of enemies that read like a who's who in America.
He was obsessed with his enemies. He was obsessed with settling scores. He was obsessed with vengeance.
Preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution.
Richard Nixon promised law and order, but gave us breaking and entering, wiretapping, forgery, slush funds, dirty tricks, perjury, and obstruction of justice. In the end, dozens would be found guilty of crimes. The president's own attorney general called it the White House horrors.
The man at the top must bear the responsibility. That responsibility, therefore, belongs here, in this office. I accept it.
It may seem like remote history for people too young to remember it, but even after 30 years, Watergate is deeply embedded in our culture and politics.
The legacy of Watergate is a shadow, just is like a knife into the heart of the presidents after Nixon.
To historians, it was an abuse of power that threatened the very heart of American democracy.
It was not a third-rate burglary. It was a breakdown in the checks and balances system that made the United States a great country.
But in the end, the system worked. American democracy prevailed, and Richard Nixon became the only man in history to resign the presidency.
It forced the resignation. A lot of people went to jail. Prices were paid. The legal system did work in the end. And I think it's really important for the next generation to understand this.
After Watergate, Americans felt empowered to hold government accountable, and a generation was inspired to join the ranks of enterprising reporters and editors who helped transform the role of journalism in America.
People think I'm a liberal, but if I had been a three-eyed Buddhist communist, I would have gone after that story. I am a newspaper man who was interested in trying to find the truth.
But it's the way Americans feel about their government that is surely Watergate's most enduring legacy. The days when Americans idolized their presidents have given way to a cynicism about government.
For most people who came of age during the 1970s, Watergate was the crucial political event. Before Watergate, 2/3 of Americans trusted Washington, but then after Watergate, 2/3 of Americans mistrusted Washington.
Since Richard Nixon resigned, presidential scandals have been labeled gates, like Iran-Contra-gate and Monica-gate. A series of legislative reforms designed to clean up government followed in Watergate's wake. But to many, Washington seems to be meaner, not cleaner, and the politics of personal destruction still defy easy solutions.
And will, to the best of my ability,
on his second inaugural, Richard Nixon wrote to his closest aides that his 4-year term would consist of exactly 1,461 days that could stand out as great days for America.
So help me God.
That promise, and the days of Richard Nixon's presidency, were ended by Watergate.
It was the saddest thing, perhaps, in the history of the American presidency.
I let the American people down. And I have to carry that burden with me for the rest of my life. My political life is over.
Watergate ended Richard Nixon's political life. It tested American democracy and changed the nation's view of itself. What began with a simple piece of tape became an unforgettable chapter in the nation's history.